Welcome back to If I Knew You Better. I'm Brendan Davis, your host, and this week's guest is ELLIOTT ZAAGMAN. ELLIOTT is someone I've known now for, I guess, about a year here in Beijing, where I'm based, and he has been on my previous show, Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, twice now. And actually, he also has made a brief appearance on How China Works that I do with Ying Li. So, as much as I always enjoy talking to El, the question is, well, how do we do a new show? And actually, I think we really did something that's unique for If I Knew You Better. So as I move my efforts to this show, I want to introduce people to this broader audience who have been on my previous shows. And more importantly, ELLIOTT really speaks to a wider audience in general. He does have this China focus as a journalist and consultant. He has a really wide range of experience. I'm also going to put links to his original episode of Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom in the show notes for this one so that you can go back and check his deeper history if you want. We cover that at a really high level really quick just to give a little context, assuming that you haven't heard it before. But we especially get into some issues that have U.S.-China significance on this one. He discusses what's happening with Huawei, adds perspective that someone who has the China experience can have, as well as being a tech journalist. ELLIOTT is also the co-host with his host, James Hull, of the China Tech Investor podcast over on TechNode. So this is in his wheelhouse, dealing with, ByteDance, Alibaba, looking at these companies, WeChat, Didi, Luckin. And so we talk a bit about this, but we expand the conversation. I really wanted to get into something about why he does what he does and how he feels about it, because as we discuss in the episode, he is, not a journalist per se, but he treads in that territory a little bit, and he's really out there, and he's being asked more and more for his opinion on these things because he has an informed one and he has a interesting, thoughtful one. And just recently, I think this is mentioned in the episode, I'm not sure if this was just our off the mic conversation, but we discussed it the day we recorded this, that he had just been on NPR's Morning Edition talking about U.S.-China stuff and Huawei in particular. He had been on the BBC, and he pops up here and there throughout all kinds of media internationally. But the most fun way to follow El is his Twitter feed, and so that's going to be linked in the show notes. Also, please check that out. Add El on Twitter if you like. Don't forget to subscribe to this show wherever you get your podcasts. I really appreciate it. Tell a friend, etc. Rate it, review it if you like it. Now, please enjoy the interview with ELLIOTT ZAAGMAN. ELLIOTT ZAAGMAN, thanks for coming back to chat with me, this time on the new show.
Number 3, third time's the charm. But I guess this is the new show, so it's the first time.
It is, right? It is. And I just said in the introduction a little bit of the history for folks that you have been on Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, as well as How China Works that I do with Ying Li.
Oh, I forgot about How China Works as you've been well. This would be number 4.
Number 4 to sit down. You were on 2 Big Fishes with me. And as I also just said in the intro, I have included a link to your original Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom where you really get into your details of your history and your path through China. And that's really interesting. But for this, we're taking a slightly different tactic. I'm still going to touch on a few of these things so that people can engage with this and have a sense of who they're listening to.
Know all the intimate details of my life.
Well, right. So how do you introduce yourself?
Intimate with ELLIOTT.
Wow. That's ELLIOTT After Dark.
Exactly, yeah.
How do you introduce yourself?
Adult content warning beforehand.
It's going to be like this, folks. This is how it goes. You are a podcaster, a investor, a lot of things, but how do you introduce yourself to people who you would like to know better?
I'm a Renaissance man, Brendan.
Well,
no, this is always the question that everyone asks, and I'm like, okay, how do I give it? The one that I'm a columnist, podcast host, and leadership and PR consultant for Chinese tech companies. That's basically the one sentence description. But basically what I do is I'm really interested in China and particularly China's tech space. So I write about it. I work in it on a consultancy level, usually for smaller firms that are kind of detached from what I write about. And then I also have a podcast, the China Tech Investor Podcast, powered by TechNode, seeking truth from facts when it comes to Chinese tech stocks and IPOs. I'm your host, ELLIOTT ZAAGMAN.
You've gotten really comfortable with that.
Yeah. Anyways, so what I have a podcast with my co-host James Hull, who is an investor, and he is much better than me at going into kind of the numbers on all of these companies. So we have a watch list of different Chinese tech firms that we follow, and we just kind of look into them, and we kind of compare what's happening kind of on the ground in China with the numbers that they're reporting. We look at IPOs, we bring on guests. Our most recent podcast that we had Shai Oster, who is the Asia Bureau Chief for The Information. We're going to be doing an event next week on May 23rd in Shanghai, the TechNode Emerge event, and we're going to have Paul Moser from the New York Times on. So we'll interview a lot of these very interesting people. We kind of have we do a little bit kind of like what you do. We have a little bit of a more of a free flowing conversation. So the podcasts go a little bit longer, but also we can kind of we're not just kind of structured and kind of had to strictly adhere to a specific outline. So I do a whole lot of things, but I just kind of follow what I'm interested in. And well, that's ultimately what it is.
Well, the timing is really good because you said the date of that conference. It's in Shanghai, and I can't drop my life and go down there. But as I look at my calendar, we're recording this, full disclosure, Friday the 17th. And this show comes out on Tuesdays. You'll be up the 22nd. So this, right. I don't know if the conference is sold out, but if you are listening to this show and you're in China, or you can get to China, by tomorrow, as you hear this, you can go attend to this conference, possibly, if there's some seats.
The Explorium in Shanghai. And
it's a pretty big spot. People can probably get in.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be room for people if they want to come in. We have a number of different panels that we'll be doing and speakers. I'm going to be on a panel about Chinese tech companies in Southeast Asia. And then we're also going to do a live podcast, and that's the one we're going to do with Paul Moser.
That is really exciting, and we're going to build to China a bit because, as with my other two podcasts, are very China-focused, and this one specifically I created not to be, but part of why I wanted to have you on is because although China is this central piece of your world, you are looking at how China and the world intersect, and you're looking at how China is intersecting with international standards and how international investors can look at Chinese companies. And so this is part of why I think that you're a great guest for this show. Give us the short version of what you consider your roots to be. We'll do a little bit of background just to help people before they go back and dig up that old big fish.
As far as my life?
Sure. Where you were from?
I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Okay.
My family, I grew up down the street from Betsy DeVos, the education secretary.
All right. Did you know Eric Prince? Did he dress up as Scrooge for the holidays? Or
I didn't meet Eric Prince, but the DeVos kids are really, they're good kids. My friend dated her daughter. My brothers were on the tennis team with her son. They were always nice people, and but also they were nice people to people like us, who are suburban
in the neighborhood,
Michiganders, that kind of thing.
Yes.
But that's kind of where I come from. It's kind of the West Michigan kind of suburban background. And then, but I left home when I was 18. I went to college, and I came to China for the first time in when I was 22 in 2008. And I just came for a teaching job and saw the Olympics, and I really found China to be really interesting because I was a sociology major. The social dynamics here are just incredible, and just all the changes that were happening, just the personal stories that you kind of run into. I kind of fell in love with the place. So I ended up going back to the U.S. for a while. I went back to grad school, and then I came back here in 2011, and I stayed here for 6 or 7 years. And I don't live here full time right now, but I'm still very focused on it for work.
Is the sociology background? China's an extension of that, of course. What do you think drew you to sociology in the first place?
I just like people. So I like, understanding. I could have been a psychology major. I could have been an anthropology major. I could have been an economics major. But I'm very interested in what motivates human interaction. in how people interact with each other. And I'm very interested in how human life on the world is changing and has been changing for the last few decades. So that's why, especially in 2008, China was so interesting, right? It's
you got to see that transformation where they're really working to step up on the world stage again, and in the most public way imaginable.
Yeah, and also every person. I mean, it's still the case with people you meet in China now. Like if you just hear about their stories, what happened, what were their parents doing, what were their grandparents doing.
Yeah.
You see this. Just the scale and the speed of change is just so incredible. And it's just very hard for me not to just be completely kind of enraptured by it, because I just find it so interesting.
I feel the same way. I've said this in different contexts and on and off microphones, but when you see, especially sort of one of these, older Chinese folks, and you see the character, like the lines on their face telling a story, like what they have lived. If you see some old person walking around here in Beijing, and now, I'm in a fairly nice area and everything, and you see some of these folks and maybe their kids or their grandkids have put them in an apartment here in my neighborhood or something. And, you just think of what they lived through. Like, what did they see? What was their life when they were, 20s or 30s, and they're now 60s or 70s, thinking where they came from. It constantly blows my mind. And that's something that I wouldn't know how to engage. Even if I was fluent in the language, I wouldn't really know where to start to really have that conversation, because that's not the culture where they're going to bare their soul to a foreigner like that. But I do love the stories that, the documentaries I've seen where people talk about some of the struggles have been fascinating. Yeah,
and I think it is a very important thing, especially since I've moved away from China and I'm not here all the time, or writing about China issues and talking about China issues. I do find it just so important and valuable to remain connected to that personal side of things, because it's so easy to look at the country as a whole, or look at just kind of these trends or some of these
like the macroeconomics and think, this is the country. And
or even just some of the problems that are happening as well, or some of the things that it could be easy to be kind of morally turned off by. But if you don't have kind of a have those personal stories that you're constantly interacting with, I find that it does. I think it's very important to be able to have those personal stories and to kind of have that emotional connection. And that is still kind of, I think, what drives kind of my passion for the place.
Well, we were talking offline, and plus we know each other outside of this anyway now, so you're kind of familiar with my own story. And again, part of why I created this show is knowing that my own life will be taking me more and more outside of China for work, though I have things and will plan to keep a base of some kind here as well. So having that perspective and being out in the world, it's really amazing to see just how much disconnect there is. And that's part of why I think what you're doing with your podcast and your journalism, your writing work is so interesting to me. Let me ask you this. Well, again, the long version of your interesting story is covered in that other show that we're going to link here. What do you consider to have been kind of your first real success? Like something that you could kind of put there on the resume in a nice fat bullet point that maybe you don't dine out on it now, but it was something that was a landmark for you that helped you get established here.
That's a really interesting thing to say, to talk about, because I don't know what that would be, and that's I don't know. So I guess what has happened with me is that I've had a number of different jobs in China. How to say what your first success is? I say the times when I was making the most money in China, I don't think many people even knew who I was.
Okay.
Right. So there's been different kinds of success that I've had in different ways. Well, but what I would say is this, I'd say that, and I said this in the first podcast, that the job that was probably the best decision I ever made career-wise in China was working for the worst company I ever worked for.
Okay.
So I worked for ELLIOTT, which was the YT Jia, this kind of eccentric, also very charismatic entrepreneur, basically raised a ton of money and just wanted to expand his tech business in a gazillion different directions, and it completely fell in on itself.
Yeah.
But
they got into entertainment. I mean,
they got
I know some
into
of those guys
they got
in
into
LA.
everywhere,
You know?
everything. Like they got into phones, TVs, content, movies.
They're trying to be like GE plus Apple plus
Cars,
Maytag
cars.
plus
I mean,
Tesla.
they tried to get into everything,
Yeah.
from nothing, right? From really basically just being a TV and entertainment and basically a Netflix to
Right.
being everything, and they collapsed on themselves. But what I really enjoyed about it was just the amount of people that I met. Also because they ended up, paying a lot of people to come and work for them above market, right? So you had these very, very talented people that, had worked for very, very good companies and were very talented. And, they came and worked for them and then they went somewhere else, right? So it allowed me to meet a lot of these people who are just very, connected and very, just very talented on the China tech scene. So that was very helpful. But it also was just kind of a hell of a story to work for a company like that and just be like, what the hell is going on?
Be on the inside and see the narrative, the public narrative versus the internal realities, and how the two things. There's probably a feedback loop at some point.
Yeah,
as the wheels started to come off.
And it also allowed you to see, like, with my boss that I had there. So the person who I worked for there was one of the most trusted people under YT Jia. And this person was very loyal to YT Jia.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see this person doing some things that maybe I would not agree with, or they could say like, well, that's, not entirely ethical or whatever, but you'd see that motivation behind that person and why that person's doing,
right,
what they're doing. And I left that company still thinking that person was somebody who I thought was a good person. Right? And so when you're in this situation where you're like, okay, well, there's just this ethical clusterfuck going on.
Yeah.
But you can still see that kind of those areas of gray where you see there are these people who, are put into these circumstances where, they are doing things that, maybe you wouldn't entirely want to be on board with, but you can still see kind of the good in them or see these areas that are respectable about them. To me, I find that it's so important with every story to look at that kind of thing, that no matter how much seems like black and white, or seems like, okay, these are the good guys or these guys are the bad guys or whatnot, that, it's always more complicated than that. And that was kind of like the lesson that it taught me. And that even though, like, especially in my podcast, we talk about, how many times or how often, like, we think that some of these companies are, probably taking some investors for a ride sometimes. You have to also think that, like, there are people working for these companies, and, that it's not. It's
you
always,
have to say it. I can't fill in the blanks, Elliott.
It's always more complicated than some people would like to make it out to be, I guess. Right.
This is part of why I wanted to. Well, I mean, I always enjoy talking to you anyway, but part of why I want to do this show and not just another free, like a Big Fish side dish, which is the addendum where it's kind of free form and kind of, play grab ass with a friend for an hour. And that's fun. And there's a little bit of that dynamic we have anyway, which is great. And probably people will hopefully enjoy listening to it if I don't talk too much. The reality is that you have this perspective. And again, the old interview will fill in the details on this, but part of this, through your journey, which we'll jump ahead into more of the present, is that along the way you worked a lot at many of these big companies as a consultant. You've gotten
full
to know
time at some of them, yeah.
Full time at some of them, but some of them as a consultant, and you've crossed paths with many of these leaders, like Richard Leo from JD, and all these people. Some of whom were like publicly known outside of China for sometimes not for the right reasons, sometimes for good reasons. So you really have this interesting perspective on this, and I think in your writing and also in your podcast, which again, I'm not an investor, and I mean, I'm more probably tech savvy than the average person, but I mean, I'm far from somebody who's, an insider in that. I have friends, like a lot of friends who are, so I have an interest in it. But a lot of what I think is my better knowledge is really just on remembering something that somebody like John Hartman said or that you said, you know.
Yeah.
So from your take, what are some of the things that led you into into your writing and now your podcast? What are some of the motivators for you, and what are some of the things that you've been learning? And I'm going to ask you 5 questions at once. And then what do you want to tell people? Well, I'll remind you of these as we go. But what this is continuing your sociological research,
right,
just with a microphone and with a pen, yeah?
I mean, to me, it's all about curiosity,
yeah,
right? And just wanting to learn more about things, but also wanting to share it with other people and have sounding boards and get feedback, and build a community. So that's why I started writing, just to kind of share ideas. I started writing for a company called an outlet called Huxiu. So Huxiuwang. So they would basically publish everything I would write in Chinese, which was really cool. And I get kind of feedback from the Chinese audience as well, which I really enjoyed. But then I also write mostly for TechNode, but I've written for SupChina. I write for the Lowy Institute, an Australian think tank, as well as a number of different outlets. But I think that let's see. Ultimately what I'm trying to do is just I'm curious. I'm not trying to like work my way up the journalism career ladder. My perspective is just trying to ask a question, try to get it answered. And then people who read me or follow me can come along with me. I don't really try to think of myself like this kind of straight-laced journalist, because I'm not a journalist. But I try to think of I look at people like Kara Swisher in the Bay Area,
sure,
or like Bill Simmons in sports, or these people who are just kind of they're interested in things,
right,
and they have opinions on things,
right.
And I think it is important to try to adhere to facts and try to not dissuade or not steer your listeners in a wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's I don't shy away from who I am and what I think and what my perspective is and what my background is, and people can disagree and people can educate me and people can and my opinion changes over time because I'm a person. But I try to have the best intentions at heart and try to go at the world and go at these issues with kind of an open mind and kind of an earnest mind. And hopefully, people respect that and, we all learn something better because of it.
Well, I'll say this, and you didn't ask me, or do you need me to be your agent or your PR guy? But because I know your story and this isn't telling any tales, what I can say very generically is because you have other jobs, you invest, you are happily married, and your wife has a good job, and your life is your fortune, and you've made your good fortune as well, to where you don't have to sell out you don't have to be a PR flag. You don't have to pimp something that you don't believe in. You can call it like you see it, and on your show, like you and James, but you disclose like some of the companies you talk about or follow. You invest in yourselves, right, for better or for worse, and so you say that, and so you're not trying, and you are known and respected in the world that follows anything to do with China stuff, with China investing, but you're not so big that you're moving the market yet.
We'll see.
We'll see. No, I think it might happen, but not that maybe you want that, maybe you don't. But you said you don't have like giant ambitions with it. I think the success will follow you.
The problems that would come with it if we actually move the market, I don't know if I would welcome that.
I don't think anybody really wants that. People think they want that power, and they don't want the downside.
In the words
of
of Kanye West, no one man should have all that power.
That's including Kanye, starting with Kanye West,
especially Kanye West.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I'll see my Kanye stories for off the mic, but my old producing partner and I were going to produce some videos for him, and that's a long story.
Oh, okay,
long story. We'll keep this in. So speaking of being authentic, this little goofy aside, I'm keeping it in, mostly so we can laugh at ourselves later, but also because, again, I do this out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Right? I'm farther from being a journalist than you, for God's sakes. I don't have anybody supporting me or publishing me to do this. I put this stuff out on my own currently. So for you, though, what are some of the current trends and issues that you're following, and why do you care? Because I know what some of your things that you're really hooked into.
Yeah.
I mean, there's one thing about being market savvy and you're following the trends and you're paying attention in IPOs. Oh my God, Lookin, and oh my God, Uber and all these things. But then you have your things that you really have some kind of an emotional skin in the game. So
we talked about ByteDance in the last episode that we did. So people can listen to that one.
Yeah.
But actually that happened.
That played. Why don't you set that up and explain what happened just a little bit? Because it did play out in a pretty interesting way.
I had written a series of different articles about ByteDance, and I kind of covered them in different ways. A lot of because of their fake news issues, or some of the ways in which they would kind of use kind of some underhanded tactics to try to silence some of their, I think, what I would consider to be very valid criticism.
Right.
But then listeners can go back to the second podcast.
Elliott was very ahead of the curve on calling this stuff out. You were the canary in the coal mine about what's become known about this.
I don't know if I would consider a canary in the coal mine.
All right, well, maybe I like a little hyperbole for breakfast. So.
I wrote a few articles earlier on.
Okay.
But and then I also covered their some of their issues that they had in India, which I think the India case was something that kind of shook me a little bit more emotionally. Not only because they had tried to if listeners can listen to the other podcasts that we did, but that they tried to
in a sentence, what was
silence their critics by basically filing some fraudulent slander or basically using WeChat and YouTube to accuse their critics of copyright violations or slander,
trying to falsely use illegal means to protect yourself.
So this was upsetting to me, and I'm not going to say that it's not an emotional thing. It is an emotional thing. But then what happened was that we started seeing what was happening in India with their elections, and with local. Basically, ByteDance had both with TikTok, which is their short video app, and also with their with some of their local Indian language apps as well. They were targeting these people that had just come online for the first time, very uneducated people, and these areas that are very, very volatile, where they've had lots of religious and sectarian violence.
They have a lot of cultural divisions related to class, religion, socioeconomic issues.
Exactly. And the business model of ByteDance is to keep people on their apps as long as possible.
Right.
In other words, it's the Facebook model.
Right.
So I don't want to say that ByteDance is the first company to do this.
Sure, far from it. Yeah,
but Facebook is getting dragged through the mud on this.
Right.
And what we've seen is ByteDance says, okay, Facebook is doing this, and now Facebook is starting to pull back a little bit. This is a business opportunity. Let's double down. And I think that this is just it's ridiculous.
Right.
I mean, and it is. I would consider it unconscionable. What's the right word?
Unconscionable.
Yeah, I think it is. It is going too far there.
Yeah.
And so I wrote about basically the fake news and the very, very kind of incendiary content that was going across on their platforms. Right. And I said some very choice words about their founder. I said that their founder claims that his number one skill is that he can delay gratification. But what these apps do is basically they're candy.
Yeah, it's the opposite. It's crack.
Exactly.
It's the rat in the lab hitting the bar for more cocaine. Basically.
Yeah, they are designed to take advantage of people's lack of ability to delay gratification. So what I said in this article that I wrote was, well, it doesn't seem to make sense that he is pushing these products that he doesn't seem like he would be using, but another way it does make sense because any drug dealer knows not to get high on their own supply. And TechNote in the English version took that part out.
Right.
And Husio, to their credit, did not. So ByteDance decided they wanted to sue Husio because they did not know that I directly worked with them. They thought that they had added those words after translating it from the English.
Because they compared the English and thought this was an add-on.
And they tried to sue them. So I had to come out and say, these are my words, and if...
Yeah, you had to own it.
Right. But Yeah, but they have not been, and they've done other things. They're one of their venture capital, their VC, when their VC investors, they're the head of PR, the vice president of PR for them, kind of started messaging me and saying some very threatening things, which I thought was very, I found very upsetting.
Sure.
And just these things where the steps that were taken, I found were just, I've written critical things about other companies before, but with this, it went to a different level where I started to worry about safety.
Sure.
These things where
we had conversations. I won't say anything here, but I know that you came under scrutiny.
Right. So but just these kind of things where it was like, what the hell is going on here? But anyways, what I've done is, they've received a lot of criticism from other outlets as well, and I'm not writing about them right now. Because other outlets are doing just fine.
Exactly. So in terms of, some of the other things that you're following, there are a lot of big stories, and of course Huawei's a big one, and my trying to sum up something more complicated than this is that, of course, I feel like you've been even-handed about what you said, and you've played devil's advocate in some cases where it seemed like that needed to be said, so you don't have like some issue. I don't see you as having like a blanket issue against Huawei. And in fact, recently you got to tour the facilities.
So
that's a really interesting thing. So tell me what up with you and Huawei? Yeah,
well, the Huawei stuff was actually like, I kind of stumbled into it. I had noticed in 2017 we saw Huawei making a lot of these gains abroad. Mm-hmm. And the way that Huawei has approached their overseas expansion, I think I've always thought was a little bit problematic. There's a lot to be commendable about them, but just the way that they're very, very, very heavily reliant on expat staff from China. Right. They're not always entirely transparent. They have a track record of violating local labor laws. And then if you look at, for example, the stuff that has come out over the last 6 months or so, just about some of their IP theft, things like that.
Sure.
We know that depending on how much of that is true and how much of it is just the U.S. government going after them, I think that there is the truth is probably in the middle somewhere.
Right. But the wolf culture and the black heart culture thing is legit.
Exactly. So these were things that I started to identify at the company, especially compared to like a company like Lenovo, which hasn't had the same kind of stellar growth that Huawei has. But also they haven't been kind of as tightly intertwined with the Chinese
the powers that be and that push certain things.
Right. So I started writing about kind of the different feedback that their overseas employees gave. What it was like to work for Huawei.
Yeah, that was on a Glassdoor, right? On the Silicon Valley, the tech job board.
Yeah,
it's basically what's it like, and what are the ideas, what are the opportunities, and what should I look out for, and what are my advantages if I'm going to interview. But also, it's where people dish if there's things to dish.
Yeah, and it wasn't just Glassdoor.
It was a lot of dirty dishes.
Yeah, I mean, just go through Huawei's Glassdoor page. I mean, there's plenty of dirty stuff out there, or stuff that does not make the company look good. But also, just I spoke with almost 30 people who had worked for either Lenovo, Huawei, or both, and just kind of hearing about Lenovo has adopted a lot of these kind of traditional multinational corporation kind of ways of doing business.
Sure.
And in some ways, this has actually been to their detriment. In some ways, they're far from a perfect company. But
they've been around so long that they were modeling the international model as it existed, and they had big success. They just they didn't change and throw their culture overboard.
And their ethos, their fundamental ethos was saying, we are a global company with Chinese roots, whereas Huawei said we are a Chinese company. And I found this to be something that I looked into the future and saw, or not look into the future. I'm not fortunate, but I would say, okay, well, this is if you're identifying yourself,
like how does this play out moving forward?
This is going to be problematic, and I started to kind of to write about this, and obviously, we've started to see some problems around this. But I'm not a flag waving American. I am an American, but I'm not this like super patriotic guy. I'm not a national security guy. I'm not a cybersecurity guy. I don't know about the backdoors or anything like that.
Sure.
But I found just some when it came to kind of the core cultural issues and the raison d'etres of of how Huawei operated, I was like, well, this is going to be a problem.
Right.
And we've seen it be a problem, and now we're seeing it be even more of a problem. But then what has happened is, since I started writing about that, as Huawei's been more controversial over time, I've started writing about them more. I've spoken on them more. I was on a panel with their head of global public affairs.
Yeah, at the Bookworm about a month or so ago, right?
About 2 months ago, and Josh Shin from the Wall Street Journal. And I did feel a little uncomfortable in that situation because...
Yeah, what was were you the token shit talker? Was that how you were presented a little bit?
Yeah, and I find that it's such a complicated issue, right? It is because there are so many different ways that the company is being attacked. There are so many different ways that people perceive either the company to be a threat or that people perceive the company to be, under attack. Right. So, a lot of people in China see that it's an attack on China. A lot of people see it as U.S. hegemony. A lot of people see it as a rising China that is, that is using technology to undermine civil rights or the current world order, right? Or human rights or the current world order. So there's all these different ways that people look at it, and it's a very, very thorny topic to talk about.
Right.
So I do find that every time I have to talk about it, I get super nervous because it's like someone's going to jump down my throat.
Right, because everybody has their own agenda,
right?
And they have their internal script for what various things mean and where it's going. And by God, if the next thing you say that's not the scene in my script,
right,
then they freak out,
right, and then and it also has very, very real consequences, right? 180,000 people work for this company,
right,
and like I had somebody message me who's a Chinese national working in the United States in telecoms, and he was saying like the more things that people say about Huawei, about IP theft, like the more I'm worried about having a job,
right.
And so
it has real world effects on actual people and.
So people get really emotional. Yeah. So at this event, I was a little I tried to give I gave my criticism to the company. I was strongly worded at times, but I think the audience had a good time. We answered questions, all that stuff. But their global VP of Public Affairs was like, "You should come and visit us," and I was like, "I'll take you up on that offer." So I messaged him later, and I was I'd been writing about them a good amount since then, as things come up just about every week now.
Sure.
And I said, I'm going to be in Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Hong Kong area. During this week, can I come and visit? He's like, yeah, let's do it. And then, so Monday, that was Monday the 13th.
You just got into Beijing today, but you've been down
in
there.
Shenzhen, yeah. So I visited, and it was impressive. I can't say. I think that there are obviously a lot bigger questions to be answered around this company that like somebody like me taking a visit.
It's kind of above your pay grade.
It's not going to change my opinion on any of those things. Right. But here's some things that are takeaways. One thing that I perceived is that there definitely is a feeling among them that like they're under attack.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways that's very accurate.
That's valid. Yeah, that's valid.
But you do see that there is just a sense of solidarity, I think, that a lot of them do have, and that a lot of the country does have around the company, which is, a
lot of reasons for that. But yeah,
it's notable. And I think we over lunch we talked about kind of the founder and the founding team and the just kind of everything around the company and kind of what the kind of symbolic meaning of everything is, and it does help you understand kind of just how deep it goes and why it's such a kind of sensitive touch point.
Yeah.
Ren Zhengfei, their founder, he was born in 1945. He was 4 years old at the founding of the People's Republic of China. He fought in Mao's army.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, and then he started this company. Right.
Yeah, that's his backstory.
Yeah, and the guy's a hard ass. The guy is somebody who, by many accounts, he's not somebody who seems like he's a grizzled guy.
You're not gonna have tea and read poetry with the guy.
You might. I don't know.
You might. Okay. Trying to compare and contrast.
But he is But what he does represent
Yeah.
is like a lot of people's grandpa.
Yeah.
And
He had this
people's dad.
determination. He was at this point where China's coming of age in this new world, and
He's been through it.
Yeah, he was part of it.
Like he lived through the Great Leap Forward.
He had skin in the
lived
game.
through the Cultural
Yeah.
Revolution. He lived.
It's like those
through it
people I
all.
said, if I could talk to the old lady down there that I see every day when I go out, that's always just kind of chilling, watching the life go by.
Yeah.
I mean, the stories she would have to tell me are crazy. She's like probably 70,
And, we can talk about all the different ways that they've had, assistance or connection with the Communist Party and the Chinese government. That's a whole different topic. But he's built a strong global company doing things their way.
Right.
The Huawei. And that is something that, from their perspective, is understandable.
Yeah.
And there's
It's a point of pride.
there's
It's not
pride
just
exactly.
this excuse. Like for them, that's a point they lead with.
Exactly. So when people see that, when people see him, they see in China they see so much of what their own struggle is.
Well, it's like he's the writer of the company in a lot of ways, and so like if someone like writes something and you see him, to use a more mundane example, but it's one that people can relate to. You see a film, like Game of Thrones. Let's use TV. Like right now, it's this popular thing. There's this subset of people who are like bashing the writing. Maybe it's not the level of current season of the previous seasons. It's pretty excellent. Okay, and this is my business. Trust me.
We can talk about Game of Thrones.
This is a lot of people working at the top of their game, pretty much
Right.
across the board, including the writers and your people. I don't want to debate it, but my point is when and they're fine. They're insulated from caring mostly, but the bottom line is that is the creation of a bunch of people. This company is his creation, along with the help of a ton of people.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, it's this guy that created this. And so they're gonna be protected. This is his like biggest kid.
Right,
in the world.
and also the way they have built this culture of loyalty, and the way that they have connected it very much with a sense of Chinese national identity,
Right.
which I have been critical of, right? So,
Sure.
and that as a multinational company,
Moving out of China,
it's
becomes an issue.
incredibly problematic.
Yeah.
But if you're working at their headquarters and the people who they recruit to work for them are very often, this is something that I've heard from a number of people.
A lot of
who've worked for
ex-military,
Huawei.
right?
Not just the ex-military, is that if they have somebody they have the same educational background, the same career background. One person is born with a silver spoon in their mouth from a big city in China. The other person, grew up from, some small village.
Oh, they want the kid from the small village because they have something to prove.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they've looked for those talents.
Yeah.
As long as they've existed, and there's so many people in China identify with that story, and there are people at Huawei who they spent their careers outside the country. They didn't get to see their kids grow up.
Yeah.
They didn't get to, maybe they maybe they're still married or not still married, but they're, the
actual relationship probably
right.
sucks. Yeah.
That they've sacrificed a lot
Right.
for this company and for, in some ways, their country, and for this idea of improvement. And if you say like what has happened, I think you say, okay, well, they steal IP, their success is not valid. If you devoted your life to that, how would you feel if someone told you that your success was not valid? You wouldn't like
you
right?
wouldn't like that.
So, like, I also understand that in a lot of ways, like, there's Huawei is problematic in a gazillion different areas.
Sure.
But then, like I said earlier, like, if you don't understand that personal side of things, and if you're not able to have that empathy, then you're not able to see the full picture. And that's like I said a gazillion times before, that's what draws me to China. That's what makes me so interested in all these stories.
From doing the work you do, so including all of it, consulting, and because a lot of people you work with are founders or CEOs or people to where you develop a relationship and you get to know the people, and so you get to know them. And of course, I would never ask you, and you wouldn't betray secrets, but you hear what people really think, at least what they're going to tell you that they really think. Between writing and the feedback from that and the people you meet, from doing the podcast and the often name brand kind of people you're getting on your show these days who really have knowledge, insider knowledge, and then the mics go off and then you fill in the gaps that you didn't broadcast. in terms of what you're comfortable saying, with that obvious caveat, what are some of the most surprising or scary or impressive things that you've learned just, in this period of time? What are some of the things that maybe you've learned or know, or you think is true in your gut that you've had anonymous to us confirmation of, that maybe there's something there? What are some of the things that are surprising to you?
Oh man. I think, it's hard to say anything about this without like people reading into it. I think in any situation, what people have to do to get success is not always things that they're proud of, and or not always things that I would agree with. And people are people, and especially the more power that people have, the more ability they have to abuse those kinds of things, right? So I think what I've learned is just to, accept people for who they are, and to say like, hey, well, I work with this person, but I don't, this person isn't me, right? And they're, I don't have to stand by everything that they do. But, I can see them as they are and try to find a way to, like help them with what they need me to help them with. But I do find that, this is not just a China thing. If you get this into Wall Street or Silicon Valley, you kind of start seeing the dirtier sides of people, or you start to see like, the kind of sacrifices that people make, or the kind of, the ways in which people, just people's vices, or people's, just, the nature of people's lives. And you just kind of have to deal with it. And then you have to kind of figure out how do you see that, and then find a way to square it away with your own sense of integrity. That's something that's sometimes a challenge for me.
How do you approach dealing with challenges and adversity, and especially where something like moral compromise is an issue for you personally? Like you mentioned, often, your job could be, if you're advising somebody, it might be in a public relations, it might be in a capacity where basically you're trying to help them deal with something tricky properly. You're trying to help them put a good face on a bad thing, and how bad a thing might be.
Yeah. Well,
so how do you sort of, how do you deal with that?
To be honest, I think the fact that I've written as much as I have, and the fact that I am kind of as outspoken as I am, I've lost a lot of business. I've had a lot of
people know you're going to say what you think,
or they're like, okay, well, I don't feel confident.
We don't need this level of rigorous honesty,
right? Exactly.
in our business.
But it also attracts some people to me as well. Sure. And I'm in a situation in life where that's, I don't have to be constantly trying to get every single business opportunity possible. Yeah. So, what I do is I just try to, I have my own kind of moral compass, and try to be as clear with everybody about where I'm coming from, and let them know kind of the expectations that I have, so that, I'm never going to, if I ever talk about a company and they have paid me in any way, I'll disclose that. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm going to be quite honest about that kind of stuff, and
sure.
I'll just be very, very clear about how I operate. And if they still want to work with me, then they'll still want to work with me. And enough companies still do want to work with me, or enough individuals still want to work with me. And that's just how it works. I don't know what else to say there.
Cool. When's the last time that you were truly angry, and why?
Every day.
Why?
I was angry today in traffic.
Okay. Well, but I mean, like, maybe you're experiencing it with rage, and that's maybe an issue that I can't help you with that. But meditation might be good. Headspace is pretty good.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? Like when something that just, has it something we've touched on, like some of the BS with ByteDance, or?
And that stuff does make me angry. Yeah. I think that's actually something that, like, in wondering professionally, what role does anger play in my work, right? So this is also something that I thought a lot about with, for example, the ByteDance case, or even sometimes with the Huawei case. Like, it's like I am I hear some of these stories and I'm like, I'm upset because sometimes I've been that guy that gets screwed over, or I've known that person, or I can empathize with that. So that does make me angry. Or I've seen, I do think that a lot of it is that, when ByteDance goes into India, they do these things that I think are, kind of irresponsible. It pisses me off. But what I do wonder about is in what ways does that anger assist my work, and in what ways does it take me over? So I try to think about it as like I'm driving a car, right? So there's me and there's angry me, right? So there's the me that I want to be. So, and hopefully that person is driving the car. So my anger can sit in a different seat, right? And that anger can talk to me, and that anger might, have some good suggestions for when to pull off, right?
Nice.
But who's driving the car? Hopefully, the more mindful me is driving the car, and the person who's being kind of my best self is driving the car. That is not always the case, but I try to make it that way.
There's that saying about be the person your dog thinks you are. I don't have a dog, but I still appreciate
I do have a dog.
I appreciate the metaphor. I know you do. I know you do. We're sort of in the home stretch of this. Who or what do you credit the most for helping to equip you for success? And what helps you maintain an even keel and to be successful just in your day-to-day at this
That's
point?
a good question. I'd say my family, and particularly like my father, my grandpa. So I come from a family of small business owners, and my great grandfather came to Grand Rapids, Michigan from the Netherlands when he was a child, right? Late 1800s or early 1900s, somewhere around there. And he started a funeral home, right? And then he gave that to his son, who's my great-grandfather, who gave it to his 4 sons, one of whom was my grandfather, who passed it on to my uncle. And then my father also started a business, right? So my father does an auto maintenance business.
Okay, so he's not in the funeral home business anymore.
But he's been doing that for over 40 years, and it's very successful. So it's a funeral home, and so it's one is from a financial point of view is that you have generational wealth is a good thing, right? So
so I've heard,
right? So it's
I'm happy for you.
No,
I'm not mad at
I shouldn't say like
I have friends who have that story.
It's not a gazillionaire thing, but it's a thing where like if you need
I understand.
It helps, right? And it gives you a sense of privilege. That
if you have that, but you also have a sense of, if you have a good family, that means a certain thing.
Right.
You can either have spoiled little shitheads, or you can have people who are respectful about this last-ditch safety net, but they're determined to make their own way in the world.
Right,
and they're obviously in that second category.
Yeah. But what I really learned to appreciate about it is that for all the business that everyone was doing, what it was is it's still a community service as well as being a business, right? When someone dies, like the funeral home is a community service, right? Like when you got to get your car fixed, right?
Yeah.
That's a community service in one way or another. And if you don't do that with a sense of integrity, right, your business goes down the toilet pretty damn quick, right? So the way that I learned business was one of that, it's of thinking more long term, and that if you're not doing right by the people around you, if you're not acting consistently, then you're going to get found out, and your success is not going to last, right? Which is also why I get so bothered when you see this kind of financial engineering
Exactly.
in the tech world, right?
Yeah.
Because that's not how I learned about business,
right?
So I think that just really does kind of go against kind of some of those core principles that I have. But at the same time, I have learned just how often like just being like some 6 foot tall, white American, privileged shithead kind of does, like, I'm not always aware of that.
Yeah.
Right. And how at the same time, especially when you spend your time in other countries as well, and you see how hard people have to work just to, the odds are not in their favor. Right. For someone like me, like there's so much that kind of the die kind of rolled right for me.
You're tall, blonde, good looking, and
not just, that's helped. That's helped
I'm not trying
places
to like
in
date you,
places
I'm
like
just
China,
saying,
and also, but there's a lot of ways in which the just things worked out the right way. So I do find that it is important to keep those principles that I get growing up, right? Those more old fashioned principles, that idea of like, I think that having that idea of business is a good like way to look at business. But at the same time, if I'm holding to my own self-righteousness that whole time and saying like, well, this is the right way.
That's usually not a good look for anybody.
Yeah, and they're the wrong, like this guy who's wheeling and dealing and trying to, make a way for himself. This guy is being unethical. Like, well, it's hard for me to judge that guy.
Sure, because he had like, for all you know, he had like zero advantages even in the game he's from, where they didn't even exist in the first place.
Exactly. So what I do try to do is try to have this kind of hold those kind of core sensibilities that I have, that I think have been instilled with me and I think are good, but also have a sense of empathy with these people who have struggled so much of their lives and who have achieved success, in the ways that they have.
I love that answer personally. I think a lot of people who travel and who live and work and have dealt with, whether it's state to state, because you travel around the U.S. and you might as well be in a different country depending on where you are and where you go. So whatever your experience dealing with people who are really not like you, that's a good perspective. I think that keeps you honest, and the expat thing just kind of turns it up to 11. Yeah. But it really, really, if you weren't already a little bit humble, you got to be a pretty big asshole to not get humble.
Well, but a lot of people don't get humble. Like this is like, you've been around the expat community. I do
not a lot. Yes, enough to know what you're saying, and enough that I don't care to.
But I also do think that this does.
Oh, there's definitely an entitled shithead club.
It is something that you do that is kind of an easy sorter.
Yeah.
When you're abroad, especially in Asia.
Right. Right.
Where you just like, okay, what does being in a place like that do to somebody?
Absolutely.
Right? Are they taking advantage of every way that they can exercise their power, or are they learning it? Are they using it to be a more compassionate, understanding, and empathetic person? So to me, that's a metric that I look at.
Last question: what's the best question about yourself or your work that I didn't think to ask you?
Oh, jeez, Louise, man, that
you like that?
That is a tough.
You can use that one if you find it useful. You're not doing the male Oprah show like I am, but
yeah, no, this is a good male Oprah show.
Thanks.
I think.
Whether it's on your mind, what else is preoccupying you we didn't get to. Or...
I think I have a lot of I think a question about regrets.
Okay.
Is something that would be a good question.
All right.
Because I do find a lot. I find myself trying to figure out exactly. I do find myself like often second guessing. Okay, how do I best kind of represent myself and represent the version of myself that I want to be, right? And especially with things like if you're writing, if you have a podcast, I think podcasts are easier because you can explain yourself more,
right?
But also like Twitter,
your tone of voice,
right,
does a lot,
right? You can turn people off by saying something in some way, and a bunch of people get upset at you, and that's not exactly what you mean, right? So, or maybe you jump down some issue. That without entirely considering the facts, because it's something that is
it's easy to do that,
right. So to me, it's I find that just I do often second guess myself and I'm like how much, because one thing I do find this
you're hitting publish a lot. You're saying a thing in some medium and then hitting send or publish. And then it's there. Yeah. And then people can have at it.
Right.
For better or for worse.
And one thing I think is especially interesting with China, and especially tricky with China, is the fact that just a lot of information isn't out there.
Yeah.
A lot of information isn't public.
Sure.
And so much does depend on context. Right?
Right. And that's a cultural thing that's thousands of years old.
So
it's not,
how much do you focus on just the facts without any context? Or how much context do you give? So I'll give you an example. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. HNA?
Yeah.
Right. So remember that the chairman of HNA, what happened with him?
Give the quick. The audience may not know, and I'm not remembering where. I don't know where you're going with this exactly.
So HNA was this Chinese conglomerate that borrowed a ton of money, expanded globally very, very quickly, got into a ton of trouble, very heavily over leveraged.
And the call came,
and then about a year ago, their chairman fell off a wall in Paris. While the official report was he was taking a selfie, right?
Sure,
and died.
Yeah,
right.
Because people with billions at stake often put themselves in life-threatening situations,
right?
Willingly.
And this is something we very often see. There's very frequently mysterious deaths or disappearances or suicides, things like that.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you report a situation like that? Do you say, well, the police said he was taking a selfie and he fell off, right? But you speak to a number of people who are close to the company and they talk about, well, this is what's happening in the days before that with him.
Right. You get the context.
Right. It's some of his information that you can't report because it's kind of high level gossip or whatever.
Sure.
Or there's just, the expectation that, well, something else happened.
Yeah.
So do you just say, well, he fell off taking a selfie, or how do you give that context?
Mm-hmm.
And that is always something that I find, even though I'm not. If you're an official journalist, I think this is much clearer.
Yeah, you have an issue, but you're in a different position.
But so in what way, trying to find out that ethical balance between giving that context and going too much into conspiracy theory, I think is something that's tricky for me. So that is something that I often struggle with and think about a lot. And maybe sometimes I get wrong or sometimes I get right. But
And maybe there's regret if you feel like you could have pushed something harder, but how do you do it in the right way?
Yeah, exactly. And then sometimes you get wrong information.
Exactly. Yeah. You might be totally convinced, and then there's one crucial piece that's missing, and you fill in that gap, and then years later, maybe you find out down the road, that gap has been filled undeniably, and that means your thesis was wrong.
Right.
And if you had gone out hard on a supposition, you would have been doing damage and been wrong, and et cetera, et cetera.
So the way in which to approach this kind of information, and how to phrase your thinking, and how to be concerned about the people who might take what you're saying in one way, in one direction or another, especially now when things are so sensitive between the U.S. and China. These are things that I think about a lot, and I don't know exactly how to do it. Right. But I guess I'm working at it, and I'm trying to kind of get the right balance as it goes along. But it's a tough balance.
Well,
for sure.
Well, he's going to be on your show tomorrow as this airs. You ask Paul Moser that for both of us, all right?
I will. Actually, Paul Moser will be a great person to ask.
Tell him I asked that question. He doesn't know how I am. Tell him I asked it. Ask it for yourself, but I'd love to know that question. Elliott, thanks a lot, man.
It's great to be here, as always.
All right, that's the show this week. You can visit crazyinagoodway.com to learn more about Elle or find his contacts or the link to the previous episode of Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom where we do the deeper dive on his background, which is pretty interesting. If you like this, I think you'll like that episode as well. Also, I have yet another great episode in the can for next week. I'm really excited to bring you Steve Katz, filmmaker and author extraordinaire. Thanks again for listening this week. Please rate, subscribe to the show, share it with friends if you like it. We're a new show. I really appreciate the support, and I could use all the help I could get to get the word out. So if you like it and you think you know someone else who might like it, I would greatly appreciate it. Have I said that now enough? Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next week.